I'm sure you have heard this quote. Knowing price is easy, but finding the right value is not. Every investor would want to know the value of their investment. Sometimes it's easy to derive the value. But defining the value of IT investment is complex. With cloud, even more. With AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, complexity is just mounting. So I reached out to my friend and said, "Hey Jason, thanks for joining. How are you doing?" And we discussed about how FinOps empowers IT leaders to articulate investment value.
We get hung up on spend, right? And I don't like that terminology. I spent 2 years representing Kyndryl on the board of governors, and today Sunil has that out of the cloud practice, and now I'm moving over to the technical advisory committee. You cannot be on the board and the technical advisory committee. A lot of really good stuff in the cloud. Can we do those same things on-prem? And rightly so, because they didn't want to muddy the water. Right? They wanted focus, and the focus was on the hyperscalers. Now, can we do the same thing with our SaaS-based contracts and our licenses? Right? So there's the FinOps for AI, so that's adding the framework to the AI that everybody. It's the generative AI, right? So that's one, right? The other part is how do we then use AI for FinOps? I'm doing great. How you doing?
I am living my dream.
I see that.
All right, Jason. So, the reason I wanted to chat with you, because, I was going through some of the studies, done by IDC. Mm-hmm. And there they say, I'm just quoting here the paper with me. It says by 27, more than 60% of the businesses will have modernized up to 50% of their cloud architecture to encourage the infrastructure and cost efficiency. So that definitely is going to bring out how do they bring the most value out of their investment, right? And then I was looking at another kind of markets and markets.com where they say that the FinOps, given that more and more adoptions are coming in, the current market 2024 of FinOps were about like $13.5 billion. Which probably is going to be about $23.3 billion by 2029, which like roughly about 11.4% CAGR for next 5 years. So it's a very important space to be in, and I could not find anybody else than you to talk about on this topic when it comes to FinOps in my mind. So I'm glad that you are able to find some time and we are able to chat today.
Yes.
So just for the audience, Jason,
So I'm on the Microsoft Global Alliance team here at Kyndryl. I started at Microsoft in 1998, January 2nd, 1998 to be exact. And then I spent about 13 years there, both in Windows support, so I understand the infrastructure. My baby was Active Directory and clustering were the two, but I worked after hours. So any call that came in for Premier support on the escalation line, I was one of 12 engineers that you would get to talk to. And then I spent another 11 years at one of the largest licensing providers in the world, Software One. Been at Kyndryl. I think my hire date is it'll be 3 years in April 18th. So been around for a while. But yes, going back to FinOps, I think I was in the top 50 of the first people to get certified in FinOps.org, which is kind of neat that I was all the way back then. What had actually happened, just to give you a little bit of background, is me and another gentleman were putting together a similar thing like FinOps. We called it cost optimization engagement is what we were calling it, right? And then all of a sudden we get this email from our CEO saying, "Hey, you guys need to check out this FinOps thing. It's all the rage," right? This is like in 2019, 2020, right around there. And it was funny because we're like 80% of what the FinOps framework was. So it was very easy for us to adapt that framework and put it onto what we were already doing, right? And so that's how I got started. Of course, it's been evolving a lot since then, for sure.
.org or FinOps Foundation were kind of starting at that point in time. So how did you get engaged with the organization?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I just went out to FinOps.org and tried to figure out what it was. Found out it was a nonprofit. JR is the person that started that. He comes from Cloudability. Cloudability was bought by Apptio. Apptio was bought by IBM, just to kind of give you the idea of his journey. And then what we did is we went out to FinOps.org. We got certified immediately, really adopted the framework. At that point, it wasn't a framework. It was a discipline. And that's a huge distinction, by the way. It did not turn into a framework until last February. And then it became a framework. The reason that particular thing is important, because a lot of people are like, who cares? The discipline framework doesn't matter. But it does, because if you think about it, most of our customers, and us specifically, our delivery teams, we've adopted the cloud adoption framework. Now, the cloud adoption framework is for all the hyperscalers. They each have their own, flavor of it. But the cloud adoption framework says, here's the best practices for creating the landing zone for the infrastructure in the cloud. And then we have the well-architected framework, which is the best practices for designing applications for the cloud, right? And so what was missing was, look, if we're giving our engineers the power and the enablement and the authority to go out and use this plethora of resources in the cloud, there has to be a framework in place that holds them accountable. So we want to empower, we want to enable our engineers and our developers, but we have to have a framework that empowers them. And I want to go back to something you said just in the intro. We talk about cost optimization a lot. And when I think about cost optimization, most people would say that's FinOps, and it's not. That is the first part of FinOps. What FinOps framework does, though, is it really goes in and says, look, if I'm going to power the engineers, we got to have that framework to hold them accountable. But what it also does is it says we need to get rid of the waste, right? So that cost optimization that you're talking about. But we need to put the things in place that stop the waste from happening to begin with, right? And that's the key, because if we only focus on a tool, we only focus on the cost optimization aspect, well, then 6 months later, we're right back to where we were. So implementing the framework is super important so we can mitigate all those things. And really at the crux of it is what is the business value for what we're doing, right? If you just focus on the cost optimization, you're never going to focus on the business value and articulate that back to the business. And one of the things I always say in my examples, and if you've ever heard me talk before, is look, if I move this workload to the cloud and I'm a doctor's office, can my doctor see more patients? Right? That's literally what we got to get down to. If I'm manufacturing, right, and I want to lessen the amount of injuries that occur on the manufacturing floor, if I put this workload in the cloud, how does it directly impact that? Am I using AI vision services and those kind of things to detect a spill and notify the appropriate person so it gets cleaned up before an accident happens? That's the business value that we got to get to. That's what the FinOps framework strives for.
Got you. And I know definitely I would love to know more about how to get the value of it. But just before that, hold your thought and just have a question. So FinOps Foundation started about 6 years ago, I guess, about 2019 or so. And since then, it's been 5-6 years now. It's in process. The framework is kind of maturing over the time. What are the key challenges do you see that clients, even today, facing to get the best out of it?
Yeah, I love it. So first of all, most people don't know what FinOps is, right? They're like, oh, it's fintech, right? So and it's not fintech, right? FinOps is finance and DevOps. It's done in an agile model. That's where the FinOps word comes from. And so when you start thinking about the FinOps and the journey and how does it start and so forth, first of all, the FinOps.org is nonprofit. It's part of the Linux Foundation. And so when we talk about it started in 2019 and it's been evolving. So what are the challenges and those kind of things? When it first came out, it was just defining FinOps. What is FinOps, right? Because everybody thought it was a tool. Everybody thought it was just cost optimization. So we had to get the enablement out there to get them to understand the framework and the, as I mentioned, the discipline before. But when you start looking at the challenges, originally the challenge was, how do I get my engineers motivated to do the things, right? And so, one of the things I always try to bring up is the iron triangle, and that's the relationship between speed, quality, and cost. And so you got to figure out what's my priority. And if cost is your priority, then what am I willing to give up in the process? And if you think about it that way, it's super important. And that's the way we have to frame this, because if we don't address that, if we don't fix it, there's natural tension between the groups. Finance cares about, when I say cares about, it's the way they're motivated, the way they're recognized, the way they're rewarded, the way they're promoted internally is to be within 3% of the budget, right? Or I need to reduce cost by 10%. And then I go over to the engineers and I go over to the developers. Well, the engineers are about uptime, performance. Right. And then the developers about how do I get less errors in my code? How do I get this out quicker? How am I innovative and worry about the experience for my users? And then I go down to the businesses and how do I beat my competition to the market? And the problem is they're not talking. So the finance person that has the bill says, hey, let's run a tool against our cloud resources. And man, we can save 30% if we get rid of all this waste out there. Well, if you go to the engineers who are rewarded and motivated and promoted and recognized internally and all that for uptime, why would I ever do that? Why would I take away resources from a perfectly working machine? I won't. Yeah. There's no motivation there. So originally the issue was just what is FinOps, right? And then it became, well, how do I motivate those engineers to do those items? And to implement those recommendations. But now what I've seen is a little bit of change. So now I've seen some of the engineers getting on board because they see the value of doing the things we're talking about, whether it's cutting carbon and saving the planet, or cutting cost, or it's allowing me more financial freedom to be able to do the things I really need to do. Right? Those are all good motivations. But the problem that we're seeing now is we can run a tool against it. We can see where the savings are. We can make those recommendations, but getting the businesses to buy off on it, getting those application owners to buy off on those recommendations and actually get it implemented is the hardest thing, again, because they're not motivated for it. They have a sunk cost. They fought for that budget at the end of the previous fiscal year. They got the budget that they needed, and they don't care anymore. There's no motivation, there's no incentive for them to then do the things that we're recommending until the next budget cycle. So that's why it's super important to understand the motivations, super important to have something like an adoption and change management aspect to it, because the people at our organizations that we work with that are responsible for FinOps are usually those that have no authority. They have all the accountability and responsibility, but no authority. So how do we influence without authority? And that's where the adoption and change management comes into play. How do we motivate those players to do things when there's no immediate motivation or recognition or promotion or award, incentive to do it? And that's kind of the biggest challenge that I'm seeing right now.
So it's something with the experience comes in. The leader leading this drive needs to figure out how to motivate, how to incentivize the people so that it can get implemented. Because that's where the crux is, I guess.
Yes.
The first leg is like figuring out, finding the recommendations, but unless it is implemented successfully, the value does not come out of it, right? So how do someone get started to go towards that direction to motivate people, incentivize people?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that. So if you look at data.finops.org, which is a survey that the FinOps organization puts out every year, and they survey a bunch of enterprise customers, and they look at, what are the problems that we're seeing, what are the and what are the successes that we're seeing in FinOps, right? We can't always just focus on the challenges and the issues. We got to focus on the successes as well. But one of the challenges is executive buy-in and executive buy-off, right? So, that's why I like to really focus in a little bit more on the adoption and change management, because it's hard to get those executives, right, to do things. And it's hard to change, people's incentives in the way that they're paid and so forth, right? That's a very difficult thing to do internally. So we do need to do that. The framework does address that. But what I add to the framework is a lot more focused on the adoption and change management. If we can get those practitioners in there and help motivate and encourage this change, right? And hopefully change the mindset of the individuals we're working with, that's the win. right? We can't count on the executives to come in and do this because those things take time. HR's got to review it. There's a lot of issues when it comes to that. But if we have a strong adoption and change management practitioner, you can make really good, quick gains, and everybody's on the same page and everybody's talking the same language, and we're all moving forward in the same direction. And that's what we're trying to look for.
Whenever I hear the term FinOps, the first thing comes to my mind is cloud. Right, because
Yes.
I read about it long back, and that time cloud was coming in. Everybody's trying to move,
Yes.
trying to control their cost, trying to get some
Right.
now kind of trying to get some value out of it. And I believe, in the wake of Gen AI, things are changing drastically. Right, the kind of it's going out of whack in terms of their cost, in terms of how the leaders determine the value of the investment they are making for the Gen AI. So is FinOps doing something in that area, or is the framework is being matured to incorporate the Gen AI to figure out how to handle that?
Yeah, so a couple things. So first of all, we get hung up on spend, right? And I don't like that terminology. The reason I don't like when we say spend is because an outcome of a very good FinOps engagement is more spend in the cloud. The customer's more confident in the cloud. They're more comfortable with the spend. They understand the forecast. They understand the billing. They understand the SLAs. They understand all of this. And with that confidence, they're going to move more and more important workloads to the cloud, like SAP. Right. And so I hate when we start talking about spend, because we should be spending more in the cloud, but the value we're bringing back to the organization is what we would hang our hat on. Right. So just because we're spending more is not a bad thing. We need to optimize our spend. So that's a key term, I would say. And then we need to be able to articulate the value back to the organization, right? But when we get stuck on spend, that's where a lot of the walls start coming up. And that's where they want to just focus on a tool, and they don't need the people, the processes, and the things that Kyndryl can bring to the table. So I would encourage us, first of all, to not talk about spend. Let's talk about optimizing, right?
Yeah.
The cost in the cloud. So that's part of it. So the second part I think that you were asking about is AI and so forth. So the way that it works in the FinOps.org is that originally when they made this concept, it was hyperscaler only. It was not SaaS-based offerings. It wasn't Microsoft 365. It wasn't on-prem. It wasn't Edge. It wasn't any of that stuff. And rightly so, because they didn't want to muddy the water. Right? They wanted focus, and the focus was on the hyperscalers. Now, one thing that has changed is for a lot of the organizations that have been successfully implementing FinOps, the organization is coming back to that FinOps team and said, man, you did a lot of really good stuff in the cloud. Can we do those same things on-prem? Can we do the same thing with our SaaS-based contracts and our licenses? And so the way that it works is the board of governors, right? Which again, you had mentioned, I spent 2 years representing Kyndryl on the board of governors, and today Sunil has that out of the cloud practice, and I'm moving over to the technical advisory committee. You cannot be on the board and the technical advisory committee at the same time. The way that it works is the board votes, and the board voted that we want to expand the scope. And so what we've done is we expanded the scope to now include on-prem and SaaS-based offerings.
Gotcha.
Now, and then once that happens, then it goes down to the technical advisory committee and says, okay, this is feasible. And then it goes to a working group to say, how do we add this to the framework? What are the specifications that we need, right? And you have a really good working group that comes there. And there's two different tracks, right? So there's the FinOps for AI. So that's adding the framework to the AI that everybody is implementing, whether it's, AI in GCP, Azure, or AWS, or it's the generative AI, right? So that's one, right? The other part is, how do we then use AI for FinOps, right? And so they're two different tracks. And so we're working with the offering teams to figure out, how do we have this enablement in these offerings that say, well, here's the FinOps framework specifically for AI, and here's the AI for FinOps, right? And go to the data and AI team and so forth for that. And so it's super important that we are included in those. And just so you guys know, if you go to FinOps.org, you guys can join these groups. And we need people out there. And we do have people from Kyndryl and our employees that participate in all these groups. I'm in the sustainability group, for example.
Okay.
And really, what the last part I want to say to that is that's important because then we have influence, right? So we don't have to wait for the standard to come out. We don't have to wait for it, the working group to complete its things. We're part of it. We can build things internally to address those, and then we can also influence the framework. So super important that we get people and more people involved from Kyndryl into the FinOps.org. It's free. Just go out there and do it and participate. And if you don't have time to participate, at least start going through it because they publish everything. It's all open source. It's all open
Right.
specs. Like start grabbing it, right? And understanding the little nuances. So for example, the AI for FinOps, you can go out there and you can see all the specifications. Where are they at with that right now? What are they looking at? What are the challenges that they're seeing? So participate, just get involved.
You pretty much answered my next question because it started with cloud, but then I wanted to understand more how FinOps is evolving in the hybrid infrastructure model right nowadays. Like not that everybody having 100% in cloud or the on-prem.
Right.
It's kind of hybrid for everyone. And then on top of it, this AI came in. Now GenAI is picking up significantly, right? Everybody's trying to find a use case to implement those and expand from there.
Exactly.
So I believe encompassing everything in a FinOps model is going to give a IT leader. I mean, even though it's not about just the cost, but in terms of the leaders, if you think about it, Jaisson, everybody wants that forecast, right? Because at the end of the day, the finance needs that data to report to the market because they have to every quarter go to the market and say like profit, loss, all the statements. So everybody's looking for that forecast and how to do that. I believe that's where FinOps adding significant value in terms of cloud, but with the on-prem, and if 360-degree comes under its lanes, then it might be a huge benefit for the IT leaders to kind of adopt that significantly.
I would actually add to that a little bit. So when I talk about FinOps, if you're again ever heard me do a presentation on it, I always include AI and I always include ESG, right?
Okay.
Because they're so interrelated. If I can go in there into my FinOps and my hyperscaler, and I can say, hey, we're doing Azure AI services and so forth, right? The challenge again is we got to get the business value, right? What is the business value of doing it? How are we able to bring that back down? But then you think about the carbon emissions and all of the statements and the ESG statements that everybody, including Kyndryl, right? We're putting those out there. And it used to be easy because there's 3 scopes, right? Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. And a lot of people, what they would do is move stuff to the cloud because you didn't have to report on Scope 3. Well, now you have to report on Scope 3, right? And so it's really important that we do that optimization. We do get rid of the waste. We look at things like functions as a service or infrastructure as code, containers, all of those things, right? Which limit, first of all, help with security because it's a lower footprint, an attack surface, I would say. The second part of it is lower carbon emissions because I'm not using as many resources or highest powered resources. I don't have a server just up there waiting for something to happen, right? And then you start talking about the AI stuff, right? And AI is killing everybody's emission statements, right? Because of how much it costs in energy for a single query. Right. And so how do you have these conversations independently? You don't. And I'll tell you just real quickly, I went to an event one time and we had 16 CIOs around the table, and it was in Canada, and it was our enterprise customers. And I asked them all, I said, hey, how many of you guys got an ESG team? And they're like, we all got an ESG team. I'm like, how many of you guys participate on that? Nobody raised their hand. How many of you have somebody on your team participating in that? Nobody. I'm like, why are you guys not part of that? Why are you waiting for the ESG team to create these statements and then force it down on IT when you guys could be showing all the amazing things you're doing and influence the direction, which hopefully frees up more money to do more amazing things? Like, why are we not over there and influencing the direction of that? We have so much power, so much capabilities, and we just are not taking credit for it. And so I really say, anytime you talk about FinOps, ESG, AI has to be in that conversation.
I love that. And you mentioned FinOps for AI for FinOps, right?
Yes.
And ESG coming to this because every day I talk to my client and the clients I support, every year we participate in that, and they ask for our ESG report because, as you said, the scope 3 part of it, now scope 2 part of it, so we need to participate.
Absolutely.
But I think, we need to see that more and more engagement so that we can go and influence, like you rightly said.
Exactly.
All right, so Jaisson, lot of information, how to do that. You explained about it. How do I get started? As a person, if I want to, so I have 2 questions in that. So as a person, I want to know more about FinOps. I want to get engaged with FinOps. How do I do that? As an organization, if I have to start implementing in a right way, whether I can take it to the last mile to reap the benefit out of it, how do I get started? How do I take my first step?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things that I would say. And the first thing is, it is to just get started, right? Like it is that simple, just get started. And so that step 1 is go to FinOps.org. I mean, everything I talk about is from the framework, right? Obviously, I adopt the Kyndryl way and I add additional value around it, but it's the FinOps framework, 100%. And so go to FinOps.org, start looking through the posters they have out there and the scopes that they have identified. Start looking at those things. And then I would say the second thing that I would do is go to data.finops.org. And so if you go to data.finops.org, that's that survey I mentioned earlier. And you can see what companies are saying are the best practices, what's not working well, what are we focusing on? Because then you can have those buzzwords. You can look at, see what's going on. You can start understanding a little bit more of why these things are important when maybe you're not technical and some of the concepts are a little bit foreign. But if you go to the framework, or the data.finops.org, it starts giving you a little bit more knowledge around that. Then I would say there's 2 other places that I would go. If you look up EDX, I don't know if people are familiar with that, but there's EDX. Think of it as like an online university. So a lot of places like MIT and Harvard and stuff will throw up free lectures and courses and all that stuff up there. But a lot of the stuff is free. And if you do a search for FinOps, they have a FinOps course up there that's free. And then if you go to FinOps.org, they have free courses and lessons out there as well. And then once you get a little bit more comfortable for it, around the framework and what it is and those buzzwords and some of the technical and the licensing concepts, I would say then you can start looking at the exams. So if you get to FinOps.org, they have a bunch of exams out there, like the professional exam, the practitioner exam, the engineer exam, the focus exam, the containers exam. So there's lots of exams out there, but the practitioner one is the one that you want. So once you get into this and you're buying off on the idea, then I would say go get that practitioner exam. But start with the free stuff and just get involved. I'm a huge advocate of IWU, and that means you guys reach out to me. I will present it the first time with you watching. We can co-present the second time, and then the third time you present with me watching, right? And we can give each other feedback, and then we can do some amazing things that I think will resonate very well, and a huge advocate. So,
all right, awesome. Thank you, Jaisson. It's been wonderful as always discussing with you. And whenever the FinOps comes to my mind, you come to my mind always the first time.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
And if so, once I publish this to the LinkedIn, is it okay if I just tag you in that LinkedIn post so that if anybody needs to reach out, because this is a vast topic, right? People would like to maybe, dig down a little more, understand more. So is it okay if I kind of tag you?
100%. I would love it. I would love the attention.
All right. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Jaisson. Take care. Bye now.
Yes, sir. Have a great day.